Hey, this is Gary Hannon. Recently had a request from somebody to play just a very rough acoustic version of one of the songs I'm going to be putting on the Songs from the Battlefield album, this project that I've been working on for a while. This particular song came about one evening. I was in the middle of the Everglades with a friend of mine, Skip, who was a helicopter gunner in Vietnam. Did a couple of tours over there, highly decorated. And another friend of mine, Jerry Ott, who was in the Marine Corps for many years, served overseas, Vietnam, and he went overseas quite a few times. So we had way too much fun one night, and when everyone said good night at the end of the night, I went and grabbed my guitar and kind of just sat there, and by the time the sun came up the next morning, this song was written. This is the rough version. You're young and strong, you got it going on. You're everything the Army trained you for. So now you're big and bad, and there's adventure to be had. You'd give an arm just to try your hand at war. But when that day arrives, it opens your eyes, but your heart falls like a stone. 'Cause when you got off that plane, they filled it up again with fallen heroes under flags flying home. So you drink to remember, then you drink to forget. Raise your glass, tell the world to kiss your ass, 'cause you're a soldier whose war ain't over yet. Then you're tighter than a wire as you're baptized under fire. But that's what makes brothers out of friends. If you make it home, you can call them on the phone and get together for a beer now and then. And drink to remember, then drink to forget. Raise a glass and tell the world to kiss your ass, 'cause you're soldiers whose war ain't over yet. One day you wake up old, feeling the cold, and you can't shake that shiver in your hands, 'cause you know that it's your time, that you're gonna be just fine, 'cause you've been through hell and you've seen promised land, and your friends will drink remember, they'll drink to forget. Raise a glass and tell the world to kiss their ass, 'cause we're old soldiers whose war ain't over yet. So that's a very rough version of that song. thank you to Jerry and to Skip for the inspiration behind that, even though you probably didn't realize it at the time. I'm very grateful, and I'm going to be putting out a few more little videos on some of these songs that I've been writing along the way and on the journey, and hope you guys enjoy.
Right.
Well, it's my pleasure from what was a warm England to now a freezing England to John in the perpetually hot Philippines to come back and have a second talk on this channel, episode 133. John, it's good to see you again, and I'm glad you're settling in well on that side of the world. And before we start talking about the topic today, which is a little bit divergent from what we normally talk about, I believe you'd like to make an appeal.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. I just wanted to talk about the financial side of things. Since making these videos is now pretty much my only source of income. I do still have a martial arts school in South Africa, but the income from the martial arts school pretty much just covers the rent for the halls and things like that. So I don't make a profit out of that. And really, the only money that I have to live on is the money that I get from YouTube. The actual YouTube money that we get from advertisers is quite small. In fact, this month it was just over 2,000 rand, and the reason it's small because other guys in America and places like that whose subscribers are mainly from America get about $3,000 a month from the kind of views that I get. But because most of my viewers are in South Africa and Zimbabwe, South Africa and Zimbabwe don't generate much income for big American companies, and so we're not a prime US or UK advertising destination, and so the sort of the kind of revenue that I get or that we get in South Africa from South African views is much less than a guy who's getting US or UK or Canadian views, for example. And so also I share that income with Hannes 50-50. So this month I only got 1,000 rand from YouTube. And obviously I can't live on 1,000 rand a month. Fortunately, we have a bunch of patrons. When I say patrons, it's an old concept. Patronage is an old concept where people who enjoy artists' work support those artists financially so that they can continue to produce that work. And I'm going back to Michelangelo had patrons who, wealthy guys who supported him. Shakespeare. So we wouldn't have the Mona Lisa and we wouldn't have Shakespeare and all that if it wasn't for patrons. So it's an old concept. And there's a website called Patreon. I have 12,600 odd subscribers. Of the 12,000, 50 have chosen to support me financially. Most of those support me with $3. So if you got 50 guys giving $3 a month, that's $150 a month, right? So also not a lot of money. However, I do have a couple of guys who give very generously. I've got one or two guys. I've got one guy who gives $100 a month. Some of them give $25 a month. So all in all, I'm getting just over I'm getting less than $500 a month. I get $540 a month, but about $100 of that goes to paying for the things that I need to make this video. For example, I had to subscribe to Zoom so that we can record, this interview without interruption. Subscribe to things like WeTransfer and Adobe and Epidemic Sound for the music, and so for the video editing software, etc., etc. So the money that guys are spending go on things like buying microphones so that we have better audio, and even this laptop that I'm using at the moment was bought for me by one of our subscribers, and so in a real sense, this channel wouldn't survive if it wasn't for the support of the people who enjoy watching our videos. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's very interesting, John, and it's your only form of income. And as you've said, people throughout history have supported arts and other type of things. I guess supporting musicians like, well, if Beethoven or somebody, they all had people supporting them. And so with the 12,000 people, if you had $1 from each one of them, it would help you tremendously, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that would be $12,000 a month. That would be unbelievable. So yeah, at the moment we're living literally. If I wouldn't be able to survive on this in South Africa, that's one of the reasons I came to the Philippines, is because you can survive if you live very, very simply in the Philippines on about $500 a month. So I'm probably earning less than that. So I'm drawing on I sold my car when I left South Africa, and I'm using up that money slowly but surely. And so in order for me to continue to survive, I need a few more subscribers, hence this appeal. You asked me a question in the beginning, was, John, what's the best way, if I want to contribute monthly? I would say there are two ways of easily supporting me. Look, if you're South African, I could just message me. I can send you my South African bank account. I bank with First National Bank. First, FNB have an agreement with PayPal. So money that goes into PayPal, I can transfer into my FNB account. So if you'd like to make a one-off contribution, it's probably best to just use PayPal. There's a link to PayPal in the description of every single video. Plus, I will start pinning a comment in the comment section of every video, which contain these links. If you want to contribute monthly, and honestly, it can be as little as $3 a month. I think it's $3, $9, $25, $50, and $100. Those are the different tiers. You don't get anything for that membership. Look, there are. I do put posts up there initially. To get started, I gave all our patrons a camouflage T-shirt and a camouflage cap, which was also donated to me by Rhodesian Brushstroke, who are the guys who make this camo. Thanks, Jeff. But that came to an end a while back, and so really, if you contribute financially, don't expect much in return. I do post things up there that I don't post anywhere else. But that's the best way to contribute on a monthly basis. What happens then is you join Patreon, choose a level that you want to contribute to, and Patreon will and they'll ask you for your credit card or banking details, and they will deduct from your account on the 1st of every month. And then on the 5th of every month, that gets paid over to my PayPal account, and I can then transfer that to my South African bank from an ATM machine here in the Philippines.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gents. I'm sure you'll agree with me that this is a very important channel for our history. We have a unique history. These videos are going to be kept for many, many years to come, and historians will probably refer to them one day. So if you'd like to help John keep things moving forward, you know what to do. So John, without further ado, I'll hand over to you now and let you chat about whatever you want to chat about.
Yeah, thanks, Tony. One of the things I think that's was important that made Rhodesian soldiers kind of unique is that we grew up in Rhodesia, which had very much, in those days anyway, pre-internet and smartphone days, and no cable TV really. We had very much a hunting, shooting, fishing kind of culture, and we grew up in the bush. And so, in my case, my dad had the same sort of upbringing. He shot his first lion at the age of 11 in the Kalahari Desert.
Wow.
And he, when I turned 10 years old, he gave me a Bruno 6.5 Mauser action Bruno 6.5 by 57, one of those beautiful rifles with a double trigger where you pull the back trigger back, and it clicks and makes the front trigger a hair trigger. And this rifle had belonged to the South African politician by the name of Oswald Piro, who used it for hunting lion. And I can remember for my 10th birthday, my dad taking me to the rifle range with the 6.5 Mauser and shooting falling plates, those metal plates. It had a short barrel and open sights, so it had 2 leaf sights, 100 yards and 200 yards, because it was used for hunting lion. And Oswald Piro's favorite technique was to wait for the lion to charge, and as it made its final leap towards him, he would shoot it in midair and then step aside with the thing landing dead at his feet. So my dad said you can't use a scope in the bush, because if a lion's charging you from 15 meters, you're not going to find it in the scope. You want to have open sights so you can look over the top of your rifle. And I remember the bullets cost in those days 2 and 3pence, and baboons were classified as vermin in Rhodesia. I don't know if you recall that, but the district commissioner used to give me 2 and 6pence for every baboon tail that I delivered to him. So if I missed, then I was making a loss. But yeah, so growing up in Rhodesia, I think had a big impact. And I can remember as kids, my dad taking us to Kariba, where we had a fishing camp, and we had those Poland dogger huts with thatched roofs, and the walls were just made of mosquito netting, so that there were no walls. Actually, you kind of were sleeping in the open, but you were protected from the mosquitoes by this wire mesh net. My dad was he was an experienced bushman, and had sort of had bushcraft skills, and he also seemed to be quite fearless, and at times I thought quite ridiculously fearless. For example, one night we had little canoes, and we used to pull them out of the lake at night and turn them upside down. And there was this rogue hippo that used to like to come in the night and stomp a hole through the canoe, with his feet. And this hippo, this was opposite the crocodile farm, and in Frenchman's Creek. And so one night this hippo came and was stomping the canoes, and my dad went out armed with a broomstick or something and charged this hippo and smacked it and chased it back into the water. So yeah, he was a bit crazy like that. Another time I can remember we had a little Renault R10 with a roof rack, and we went on an early morning game viewing drive. What do they call that?
The power lines.
The pylons from Kariba to Salisbury. They cleared a whole strip there, and there was a lot of game on that. So on our way to go view the game on the pylon strip, we got stuck in the mud right opposite a pride of lions. We were stuck in the mud, and my brother and I were sitting on top of the roof rack, and about 15 meters from the edge of the road was a pride of about 10 lions lying there. And my dad quite fearlessly got out, broke a branch off, and went and shoot away this pride of lions with these broken branches, these leaves, saying, shoot, off you go, off you go, off you go. And then he broke more branches and sort of put them under the wheel, and we were able to get out. But he didn't seem to have any fear whatsoever, when it came to wild animals. So, and some other animals sensed that he wasn't afraid of them, and that made them a bit wary of him. But another early memory I have of my dad, and this is worth mentioning, is when my dad became an Anglican priest. When I was young, I was 6, 7, 8 years old. We were sent to St. Faith's Mission, which was a mission station outside of Rhodesia. And St. Faith's Mission was traditionally sympathetic to the terrorists. And the main priest there was a guy by the name of Didymus Mutasa, which may be a name that's familiar to Zimbabweans. He became the first Speaker of the House of Assembly in Zimbabwe.
Yeah.
But Didymus Mutasa was an Anglican priest, and under my dad. And my dad, a lot of these mission stations were supposed to be run as commercial farms. And my dad, because he had a farming background, was sent there as a kind of a Doberman to do forensic audits to find out, A, what was happening to all the money, and B, what best practices they could, implement to make the farm profitable, because all of these mission stations were running at a loss, and in fact, the Rhodesian government was threatening to close some of them down. So a lot of them were run as commercial farms and had a school on board. My dad very quickly found out that Didymus Mutasa and his cronies were stealing the church money and the church property, and things like tractors were being sold off, and livestock was being sold off for lobola and that type. So we're talking about Anglican clergymen stealing money. and so my dad was obviously, he was a racist and everything, because he had but so we weren't there a week when a group of several hundred, I'd say several hundred, probably 200 or 300 locals came in the early evening, led by Didymus Mutasa, and they were carrying burning torches and pangas and knobkerries and things like that. And my dad was standing on the stoop of our thatched roof cottage, and asked Mutasa what's going on, and he said, "No, we've come here to burn your house down and to kill you." And so my dad said, "Well, just wait a second." He went inside, and Mutasa, I suppose, thought he was going to warn my mom, and he came out with that 6.5 Mauser that I later inherited, and he had 5 rounds in the magazine, and he cocked the thing and pointed it at Didymus Mutasa and said to him, "Look, you're welcome to burn us out and kill us, but the first person to throw a burning thing onto our thatched roof, I'm going to start shooting, and I'm going to start with you," he said to him. And he said, you're all crowded together, so this bullet's probably going to go through you and kill the guy behind you as well. So he said, "I'm quite confident that I could kill 7 or 8 of you before this rifle is empty, and then you're welcome to kill me and us and burn our house down." And so guys who were standing around Mutasa began to disperse, and there was lots of mumbling and grumbling and whatever, and slowly they all turned around and walked off, and so the incident came to nothing. But that's one of my earliest childhood memories that's burnt into my memory.
And it must have molded your attitude towards life as well.
Yeah, it's difficult for me to say, Tony. I had wonderful parents, and my brother and I both enjoyed a great childhood in Rhodesia. Whilst my parents were very loving and attentive, wonderful parents, like I said earlier, they did shunt my brother and I off to boarding school quite early, but that also had its benefits for me, because joining the army wasn't such a traumatic thing, because I was used to dormitory life and that sort of thing. And having prefects shouting at you, having corporals shouting at you is not pretty much the same thing. And there were a number of amusing incidents, which I forgot to mention in my last talk, which I'd like to talk about now. The one was during my time in training troop, was this guy, Moose Erasmus, who's quite famous. Anybody who's been in the RLI's heard of Moose Erasmus. He was this terrifying guy who had thick ankles and thick wrists and no neck and a broken nose. Apparently, he's long dead now, but apparently he used to drink himself to a standstill every night. But he was a complete artist at shouting at the young recruits, And I don't know where he came up with some of these jokes, but they were absolutely, he was just so funny. And I can remember one incident where we were taken down to some grenade range where there was these kind of pits with a low wall which you stand in, and then there was a high tower, a concrete tower with a crow's nest on top, where Sergeant Major Erasmus was standing watching the proceedings, and then Recruit van Zyl comes up and is given a M962 fragmentation grenade. We also learned how to make Mills bombs, those ones that you screw in the base plate. And so at school I was useless at cricket. I couldn't bowl, and your thing is to hold the grenade in one hand and the pin in the other, and then I can't remember which is which. You either pull the grenade out, or sorry, pull the pin out that way and the grenade that way, and then you're supposed to throw it and let it go.
Yeah.
And I kind of let it go a little bit too late, and the thing landed about 2 meters away away from me on the other side of this wall. And I looked at this thing, and I think it was Sergeant Atkinson who was standing next to me, grabbed me by the scruff of the neck and pulled me down behind the wall. The grenade went off, and from the top of this concrete tower came this bellowing like a wounded buffalo, you know? And it was Moose who was wanting to know who the hell threw that, you know. And he said, Van Zyl, what did you do in Civvy Street? Flower arrangements, you know. Anyway, yeah, but the weird thing was, I mean, the recruits were absolutely terrified of Moose, but I couldn't help smiling and laughing at his jokes. You know, that he used the insults that he used to hurl at us were absolutely brilliant. And but the thing is, when he gave orders to left turn or right turn or whatever, often his orders were indistinct. So he would say, ah! And you don't know what the ah is. You know, whether it's salute to the left or turn right or turn left. You know, right or left could both be ah. You know, so and if you turned the wrong way, then he would shout at the top of his voice for the RPs, and all the way in the RLI, all the way to the guard room at at the entrance. The regimental police would come running across with their red caps on, and they would arrest you. You know, they would remove your headgear, remove your belt, and double mark time you all the way back to the guard. But on the day of our and Sergeant Atkinson for some reason took a dislike to me, and he used to come up and stand in my face and breathe into my face and say, I'm gonna break you, Van Zyl. He said, I'm gonna break you. And I never knew why he took a dislike to me, but he did. But Moose Erasmus did the same thing. As we were getting ready for our passing out parade, he came up to me and stared in the face, and then took a few steps back and said, called out my name, and I was like, I sort of came to attention, and he told me to step forward and do an about turn, and I thought, oh dear, I'm in deep trouble now. But he apparently said, now this man, this is what a man what you're supposed to look like, you know. I was, you know, it was something about my beret or something that he really liked. I don't know what it was. For some reason, he made me stick man of the squad. So stick man of the squad is not the same as best recruit. But what you get for being stick man is you get to miss the passing out parade. So I was allowed to sit it out and sit on the benches with the parents and the crowd of onlookers.
Excellent.
So I never had to do the passing out parade, which was. And Sergeant Atkinson was completely mortified that I'd been, you know, singled out as the most jacked recruit in the whole thing. Tony, coming to last time I talked a bit about my time in the SAS, but that was a very short time. When I left the SAS, I was assigned to 3 Commando, and 3 Commando at that time was on a bush trip doing Fire Force operations in Mount Darwin, at the Jock there, and that was pre the new airport or airfield, should I say, and the choppers were parked on a football field near the Jock where the Salute Scouts fort was, and on our way to Mount Darwin, I and some other guy who I can't remember were made escort on the back of the canteen vehicle. The canteen vehicle was driven by Martin Hudson, fondly known to us as Pudding, and was piled high with beers and crates of beers and cokes, and covered with a tarpaulin. And I had an MAG, and the guy next to me had an FN, and we sat on top of this tarpaulin. And of course the RLs, you know, all the wheels were filled with water and all that kind of stuff. And we duly drove from Salisbury all the way to Mount Darwin. And coming down the sort of mountain pass from Mount Darwin into the town, something went wrong. I had dozed off. Apparently, I found out later it was a U-bolt that had snapped. Now, I'm not a mechanical guy, and I'm not sure how that affects things, but apparently the U-bolt snapped and lost control of the vehicle and rolled the vehicle. All I can remember was waking up and I'm flying through the air. And there's beers and cokes going past me in the air. I thought we'd hit a landmine. So I landed in amongst the broken glass on the road and everything, and I wasn't cut or anything, but I couldn't find I thought they're going to ambush us now. We've hit a landmine, because I turned around and I saw the whole vehicle was on its side, and there were beers and cokes all over the road, and I couldn't find my MAG anywhere. And so without thinking, I ran up to the other guy who still had his FN, and I yanked it out of his hands. I said, thanks, I'll have that. There's no ways I'm going to be unarmed when we get attacked. And I'm standing in the middle of the road with this FN, waiting for the war to begin. And then another RL came over the rise, and it was 14 troop. There was no officer on the RL, but it was Sergeant Graham Enslin, log. And all the 14 troop guys stopped, and they looked at me standing in the middle of the road with my FN, and they all started laughing at me. And then, without saying a word, they debussed, and Log went over to talk to Pudding, who was lying. He'd dislocated his shoulder or broken his shoulder or something in the accident. And the rest of the guys started opening beers. And they steadily drank as many beers as they possibly could. We're about 5:30 or something. Log Ensign called in, hello 3, this is 34 Bravo or whatever. Incident here with the canteen vehicle, and so we went to Jock Darwin, and it was that time of the evening when the sit-reps were coming in, and guys were. And this is my first day in the bush, and I've already been in an accident, and I've seen this whole thing happen. And then there were two guys standing there, and they were looking at a map and pointing at the map. I think it was Viv Henning and Gibbo Gibson. And Gibson pointed out this map had 2 bullet holes in it. And apparently they'd just been picked up by a chopper, and they didn't have the orange day glow inside their camouflage helmets. And so they're wearing camo at last light. The chopper pilot couldn't see them. And so he said to them, wave your map. Turn your map upside down and wave your map, that big white square, And so the guys were waving the map so the chopper pilot could see where they were. And while they were waving the map, some brave terrorists fired a couple of rounds and put 2 bullet holes in the map. And I was like amazed. I was like, wow, this is my first day in the bush, and already this is fantastic. This is going to be a huge adventure. I had a couple of other amusing incidents that happened to me at Jock Darwin. The one was if you were on guard duty at 5 a.m., you had to light the fire to start the donkey boiler for the showers. So from 5 a.m., 6 a.m., everyone would get up, and they would all go to the ablution, do their morning ablutions. And the way we used to light the donkey boiler is right next to where the showers was the Air Force airfield with drums of aviation fuel, and then parked next to the aviation fuel were all the G cars and the K cars and whatever. And so I'm still half asleep, and I went over and I piled some wood on the coals of the fire, because the thing had sort of died out during the night, but not quite died out. And I took a bucket from the showers, and I filled the bucket with aviation fuel from one of the drums, and then I went and I threw the bucket of aviation fuel onto the fire, and nothing happened. It just made a hissing sound as the aviation fuel landed on the hot coals, but it didn't ignite. It just created this thick steam that rose up, but was heavier than air. So the steam kind of flowed down the drain of the, and it flowed downhill down towards the drums of aviation fuel. And when it was like a snake, and I was quite fascinated watching it. Anyway, it was about this far from this huge pyramid of aviation fuel drums, when I took a match and I lit it, and the whole thing went I promise you, I came this far to destroying the whole of 7 Squadron. I don't know how many choppers we had, but I would have taken out about 10 choppers that morning. And I would have become, you know, Mugabe would have given me a medal as a hero.
Yeah.
You know,
Hero of the revolution.
Yeah, I know a plot reserved for me at Heroes Acre, you know. Yeah. So nobody knows about that except you guys know about it now because I never told anybody about that. I came this just to wiping out a bunch of Another incident that occurred at Mount Darwin was being an MAG gunner, I slowly became less and less familiar with the FN, the FAL 7.62 FAL. And but doing guard duty, nobody wants to lug around an MAG on guard duty. So one of my buddies, I think it was Quentin Ferree or somebody, let me use his FN for guard duty. And you know, I was half asleep again. You know, it's, I don't know, 3 o'clock in the morning. And I go outside the barrack room and now I want to make this weapon safe. Now, the procedure is you remove the magazine, you cock the thing to make sure that there's no round in the chamber, put the magazine back on, switch off the safety, fire off the, you know, to release the spring. And then you've made safe. You know, I just got the order a little bit mixed up. I cocked it first, then removed the magazine, then put the magazine back on, and then clicked off the safety and fired. And I had, fortunately, I was pointing it up into the air when I fired, and I had an accidental discharge, which in the RLI was an automatic 28 days DB. You know, you went to detention barracks for 28 days, and automatically. I mean, it's just. And I just remember seeing the single tracer climbing up into the, and I immediately woke up and I was firing on all cylinders and I shouted at the top of my voice, "Halt! Who goes there?" And anyway, I claimed that there was some guy eyeballing our camp, and I fired a warning shot over his head to try, and he ran away and everything. Anyway, the next morning I get called in to the ops room, and there's Doug Lambert, Major Doug Lambert. So he says, "Hello, Van." He says, "So I believe you had an accidental discharge last night." You know, it's like, "No, sir." He said, "I've heard your story." He said, "Don't say any more." He said, "The Salu Scouts have done a 360 of our camp, and their experienced trackers tell me that there was nobody eyeballing our camp last night. They picked up absolutely no tracks whatsoever. What do you have to say to that?" And I just shuffled down and looked at my feet. He said, "Just be more careful next time, Van. Now bugger off." And so I got let off. I didn't, you know, he knew I was bullshitting, and he just let me off. So he had a little smile on his face, and you know, he didn't allow me to, you know, tie myself in knots with my lies or anything like that. I don't know. Doug Lambert, I was very fond of him, made a big impression on me. In fact, the last time I saw Doug Lambert was at Trevor Des Fountain's funeral in Somerset West.
John, I believe you have one more thing you'd like to add that's not humorous. Would you like to go ahead with that story?
Thanks, Tony. Yeah, this is quite an interesting story. It was, if my memory serves me correctly, and I may be wrong about this, I haven't checked on Google whether this is the correct date, but I believe on the 24th of May, 1975, it was a full moon. And somewhere in the Rushinga area, there was going to be a big pungwi. Now, a pungwi is a gathering of political commissars and the leaders of the various. In this case, they believe that the commanders of the various terrorist operational areas. The terrorists had names for their operational areas like Monomatapa, Nahanda, Chaminuka, Rubatsiro, all these different areas. And apparently the commanders of each of these areas were going to gather at a village complex in the Rushinga area on the night of a full moon, and there was going to be a big beer drink and a big pungwi, and they were going to have a gathering. And one stick of RLI were issued with it was a first generation night sight. I think we were the first guys to use this night sight. It was mounted onto the dust cover of an FN, but we didn't use it in that role with a rifle. We used it, just as a monocle, really, because it was like a scope, and I remember it was very green and very grainy and very, very first generation, not sophisticated at all. And there was a switch for moonlight and there was a switch for no moonlight and that type of thing. And the four of us were supposed to infiltrate this village complex undetected, which is very, very, very hard to do. And somehow we managed to infiltrate this village complex undetected. And I chose as our layup point a hill feature, a copy that was a burial ground, because the locals were too superstitious to go onto that copy. So you wouldn't get herd boys with their goats herding their goats onto that copy and then compromising you. And so I felt the best chance of success we had was to actually make our camp in a burial ground where nobody would disturb us. And then every night, two guys would stay behind and look after the kit, and two guys would sneak down and do listening patrols. So a couple of the guys who were chosen were familiar with the local language, and I can remember, in fact, the night before the beer drink, or the night before we thought the beer drink was, I was sent down. It was my turn to go down, and I had the night sight with me. And in order to approach the village that we were going to observe and do a listening patrol, a listening patrol is where you sit outside the huts and you listen to the conversations that are going on around the campfire and inside the huts, and you might hear something like "Pass me my AK," or you don't know what you're going to hear, but you're listening, and so because we had to approach this village through a mealie field, and the maize was quite thick and closely grown, and the stalks were quite dry, so it was quite difficult to go through this maize field without making enough noise to wake the dead. I decided to leave my MAG behind, and for some weird reason, all I had on me was a Bowie knife. But the guy with me, he had an FN, and I had a Bowie knife, and I had this scope. And as we exited the maize field onto a path, I heard the sound of voices. So I crept into the bush on the side of the path, and I squatted down and I looked through the scope, and there were two guys approaching, talking very loudly. Both of them had AKs slung over their shoulder. And I thought, okay, I'm going to creep back into the maize field. But as I lowered the scope in the moonlight, I could see that they were too close. That if I was to move from where I was on the other side of the path back over the path into the maize field, they would see me. They would see the movement. So there was no time to make a decision as what to do. So I just made myself as small as I could. I was sitting down, and I pretended to be a rock. And I thought that Simon and Garfunkel song, I am a rock. I am an island. No one can see me. No one can hear me. I was like, I made myself as small as I could, and I just made no movement at all. And these two guys walked right next to me. Honestly, Tony, I could have reached out and touched their legs. I had no weapon on me other than a Bowie knife. and these guys walked past me, and I was like, they didn't see me. They were jabbering away. And I crept back into the mealie field. I thought, geez, that was a close shave, But and then the next night, which was the actual night of the beer drink, it wasn't my turn to go down. And by the way, we never located the actual, because these village complexes are, you don't know where the guys are actually going to be. They could be a kilometer away. I mean, these village complexes stretch.
They're massive, yeah.
So it was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, really. And but there was a presence there because I'd seen guys with AKs and everything. But it was my turn to stay behind to look after the kit. And for some reason, they decided that 3 guys would go down and that I would be alone on this copy with all the gear. And you know, Christians will understand what I'm talking about now. There was a presence. There was like an evil presence during the spear drink. You know, they play the drums, and there's dancing. And when they dance, the people who dancing sometimes get possessed with spirits, and they fall on the ground, frothing at the mouth, and their eyeballs roll back, and they arch their backs, and they, you know, it's like something out of a horror movie, you know. And
absolutely, I've seen it. Yeah,
literally, as a Christian, I could feel the air was so thick with spiritual activity. You could cut the air with a knife. It was almost like cream or something. The air was so thick, you know. And I can just remember praying and praying and praying and praying under my breath, praying and praying and praying. I felt like I was a little candle of light, and the darkness was just trying to. I can't explain it, but I was just scared of being alone at night on my own in a graveyard in the middle of it, with all the witch doctors and everyone chanting and the people dancing and the drums going. And but there was powerful spiritual activity. And you know, often you used to find the terrorists with muti, you know, tied around their necks and everything, which had been given to them by the witch doctors to make them invincible to the white man's bullets. And so they you know, and one of the leaders of the first Chimurenga was a witch doctor by the name of Nahanda, a famous. So you know, to say that this whole war, that there wasn't a spiritual warfare side to it. There was a big spiritual warfare side to it, you know. And I became very aware of that night, you know, the spiritual warfare side.
Absolutely. And John, on the other side of the coin, I know of at least 2 recorded incidents where terrorists refused to attack farmsteads and were captured later through tracking. And they said, well, why didn't you attack that farm? There was only the wife and a kid there. And they said, oh, there were all these soldiers dressed in white around the veranda. And so we pulled out, and that's been recorded twice, I believe.
Yeah,
so, yes,
one of those incidents happened to Phil Alexander. I'm mates with Phil's widow. She was a Springer, and the Springer family were well known in Chipinga. But Phil Alexander was the butcher in Chipinga, and he was a born-again Christian. And one night they were watching TV, and a terrorist threw, or there was a rifle grenade, or an RPG-7, or a hand grenade. I don't know. I didn't read the account myself, but apparently it went through the grenade screen that they had over the windows and got caught in the curtain behind Phil's head, and it was a dud. It never went off.
Oh, man.
And apparently they kind of wanted to attack the farmhouse, but the farmhouse was surrounded by a bunch of angels who were, you know, dressed in white light, and apparently they didn't, and that happened to Phil Alexander, I believe, the Chipinga butcher. Yeah, that was the story I heard.
Well, as a believer, I often went out into rural areas to show films to the locals about Jesus, and I tell you, some amazing things happened, like being in an open-sided shed, clear blue skies, and before the film was shown in the evening, and stones landing on the Marathas just out of nowhere. And the countryside was absolutely littered in what you would call strongholds around Sevashani, Fort Vic, all those areas. They were like demonic strongholds, and very, very real. And the Africans will tell you that they've seen these little guys. If you tell them that there's a little green guy on the back of a hyena, they will absolutely crap themselves. They'll turn white because
Sorry, talking about Phil Alexander brought back a memory for me, which I think is worth recording. And I've just remembered Phil was married to Lynn Alexander, who was a Springer, Pete Springer's sister. But My dad had a photographic memory, and he was almost autistic in the way that he could add numbers and compute mathematical calculations. So if you said to him, what's 673.5 times 43.72, before you could type that into a calculator, he would give you the answer, and it would
Amazing.
be correct. So he had this weird mathematical genius thing about him. And if you told him your phone number, he wouldn't write it down. And 25 years later, he would be able to say, "Oh, Tony Ballinger's phone number. Yeah, that's so." So my dad had a checkbook, and when we left Chipinga after a whole lifetime there, when my parents were leaving Chipinga, he knew he had kept every time he wrote a check, he kept a running balance in his mind, so he knew exactly how much money he had in his checking account, and he never ever read his bank statements because he already knew how much he had. He didn't need to read the bank statement. And so when he went to close his account at Standard Bank in Chipinga, he was very mystified, but he had this huge positive bank balance, you know. And he said, "No, that's impossible. I know exactly how much money it is. It's not possible that I've got all these thousands of dollars in my bank account." And only later he kind of worked it out. That what had happened was every month, Phil Alexander ran the butchery, and we used to buy meat on tick. And at the end of every month, Phil would send my dad an invoice, and my dad would write a check and send it back to Phil. And Phil would take the check out of the envelope and rip it up and throw it in the rubbish bin, because that was Phil's way of contributing towards the church, was that we could buy meat at his butchery, and when we paid for it, he would tear the check up. And several years of every month, Phil tearing up the check. When my dad went to close his bank account, he had this huge bank balance, and he was like, "Where did this come from?" You know? And maybe it was, you know, I don't know, but maybe that was one of the karmic reasons why, you know, Phil survived that grenade attack. I don't know. It's an interesting story.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Real testimony, that. Yeah.
A couple of other small things that I recall that were quite amusing was we had a few Afrikaners in our ranks, like Marius Marais, the famous poster boy with the MAG, you know, with that poster.
Yes,
and guys like Harry File, and you know, we called them slopes. I know the South African terribly affected with us, but I can remember, you know, the John Norman, I think, or somebody calling us and told those South Africans today who are going out on patrol, please take your rain gear with you, because apparently it's going to be raining on all north-facing slopes. And Marius Marais was a newly minted corporal when I was in his stick. Our call sign was 34 Charlie, and the time came for him to give a sit rep at you know, in the evening at last light. All the guys used to call in their sit reps to the ops room, and Marius said, "Hello, 3, this is 34 Charlie. I want to send my and then he couldn't remember the word sit rep. He wanted to send my I said syrup. I want to send my syrup. No, not syrup. And then I said recipe. He said, yes, I want to send my recipe. The Major Lambert said to him, "Switch on, Marais. I'm just going to fucking send it anyway." He said. Anyway, that was amusing.
Yeah, they were great fun, those guys.
Yeah. And then there was other going out on those odd times that we had to spend a night in the bush. Either we were doing patrols during the day and then OPs at night, but there wasn't a lot of that. We were mainly doing fire force. But there were occasions when we had to sleep out in the bush. And at that time, I was Tim Baxter's MAG gunner in call sign 34 Alpha, which is 14 Troop Commander. And Tim used to dislike doing guard duty. So, because there's only 4 of you, so you have to share the guard duty equally. Tim would prefer that we bombshelled and each just bedded down by ourselves, far away from each other, so that if the terrorists found one of us at night, they wouldn't find the other 3 guys, you know. And this meant sleeping completely alone in the bush. And my sleeping bag was a double layer of parachute silk, which wasn't that hot. It wasn't as hot as a sleeping bag. So, because you had to cover yourself because of the mosquitoes, otherwise you'd be eaten alive by mozzies. But the parachute silk was light enough that I could fold that thing up and stuff it in my top pocket, It was light enough to keep me warm, at the same time, light enough not to be too hot. And at the same time, it kept the mozzies off me. But I was a little bit afraid of sleeping in the dark, I must be honest. And the one time I woke up, I don't know what time it was, early hours of the morning, literally, and there was a hyena. His face was over the top of my face. And you all know the stories of how hyenas are fond of biting off people's faces while they're sleeping. And I got such a fright, and I woke up, I made some kind of woo sound, which didn't scare the hyena at all. In fact, it kind of backed away slightly, but it didn't run away. And then I scrabbled around and I found a fist-sized rock, and I picked up the rock and I threw it at the hyena, and the rock bounced off the hyena, and the hyena again he moved away a couple of feet, but he didn't run away. And I was pelting this hyena with rocks, and he refused to run away. And eventually I was making enough noise that the other guys came. They were scared that I was going to compromise their position. But I was actually I didn't want to shoot at the thing because then our whole mission would be compromised. So, they came, and we all four of us started pelting this thing with rocks, and only then did it very reluctantly sort of canter off, But that was.
Can I just interject there? We were doing an ambush somewhere in I don't know, around the Zambezi River, Vic Falls, east of Vic Falls, somewhere. And one of our guys, Eddie Gray, was in an ambush position with the other guys, and he said he smelled something really rotten, and turned around, and a hyena bit him right in the face, and he had to go for reconstructive surgery. So that's a fairly common thing, actually.
Yeah, look, we had in the operational area there was a curfew, so after dark, between last light and first light, civilians weren't supposed to be traveling on the roads and that type of thing. But of course, on a Friday evening or whatever, they would have a beer drink, and then they would get drunk, and then they would walk back to their kraal, and on the way home they would often keel over and pass out drunk on the side of the path, and not wake up the next morning because their face had been bitten off by a hyena in the middle of the night. It actually reminds me of a situation with Tim Bax where we had to do an ambush on a road between two village complexes, and when it came my turn so when you do an ambush, you set up the claymore mines, and then I was the MAG gunner, but the of the four of you, three of you are fast asleep and one of you is awake. And then before you initiate the ambush, you wake up the other guys, and then you have an instant light grenade, or a couple of Icarus flares or whatever, and then you detonate the claymores, and then the MAG gunner is supposed to give a belt, and then you basically initiate the ambush. And I can remember one night being woken up and told to man my gun, and you could hear a group of people walking down the road, and they were jabbering away at the top of their voices, which they often used to do. I don't know whether it was to scare away wild animals or to let the evil spirits know that you were approaching, or you know how the natives were, but there was a curfew on, and they shouldn't have been traveling at night. And by strict rules, we should have initiated that ambush and killed them. But often what the terrorists would do is they would drive a group of civilians in front of them. If they had a group of terrorists, they would take a bunch of women and children or whatever, and old men, and drive them in front, so that if there was an ambush, then they would not be caught in the ambush, but rather the civilians would be. And so Tim Bax, quite rightly, decided not to initiate the ambush, and he said, "Are you ready, man? Are you ready?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'm ready," because I was on the gun. He let the group of civilians go through, but there was no one else. So those civilians don't know how close they came to being taken out that night. But Tim, as I mentioned before, he didn't like doing guard duty. And so when it came his turn to man the ambush, he often used to wake me up. and he'd wake me up and say, "Hey, Van, are you awake?" I'd say, "Yes, sir, I am now." He'd say, "Van, did I ever tell you that story about Vietnam?" So I said, "No, sir." And he'd say, in Vietnam, they used to surround their camp at night with claymore mines. And then the VC used to come at night and they used to turn the claymores around. And then they used to make a big noise. And then the Americans would set off the claymores and then all the shrapnel would kill them. And so he used to wake me up in the middle of the night so that he had someone to talk to while he was on guard duty. And then he'd go back to sleep and say, "By the way, Van, it's your turn to do guard now." And he'd go back to sleep after talking.
Oh, no.
Yeah, so that was my memories of the blacks. And I maybe end off with a couple of other short stories. The one was, I can't remember where it was. I think it was on the road to Rusambo, or Rushinga, which we called Ambush Alley. It was famous for its landmines and ambushes and that type of thing. And on this one occasion, one of the vehicles, I think, hit a landmine, and we all had to debus. So, obviously debusing, when the guys debus, for some reason there was firing going on. I'm not sure if we were ambushed as well. I can't remember, to be honest, but I can remember the procedures was that the MAG gunner had to lay down covering fire while everyone else debussed. And I remember debussing was always a bit hectic because you were scared of jumping onto anti-personnel mines that had been laid around the ambush site, and I was laying down covering fire, and then as I jumped off the vehicle, I felt the searing pain in my arm. It was so painful that I was quite sure that I'd been shot, or that I'd picked up some shrapnel or something. But actually, it was my combat jacket was hanging open, and the doppies fall out the bottom of the MAG, and then all these hot doppies had fallen into the sleeve of my combat jacket and taken all the skin off my arm here, and so I kind of emptied all these hot doppies out of the sleeve of my combat jacket. And,
horrible.
That was the one time I was wounded, I should have got a Purple Heart for that, but
absolutely.
And I don't know about your experience with army drivers, but I developed a phobia. I was not afraid of helicopters or airplanes, but I was terrified of climbing onto the back of an RL with an army driver. Because especially at the end of a bush trip when we were on our way back to Salisbury, most of the drivers were, 3 sheets to the wind. And in the operational area, a lot of the times they drove at night without lights on. And these huge RLs with sandbags on the back and conveyor belting and water in the wheels, the thing's heavy and it's unstable, and it's terrifying being on the back of that knowing there's a drunk driver, And I can remember near Centenary somewhere there was those little strip roads, and we were going along the strip road. Honestly, we were doing about 60 miles an hour, 100 kilometers an hour on a strip road. And around the corner comes this farmer with his bucky, and we had to move off the strip road with one wheel on this strip and the farmer on. And somehow the driver, we were going too fast to negotiate this corner. And at 100 kilometers an hour or 90 kilometers an hour, whatever we were doing at that stage, we left the road. And there was an embankment, and this whole RL was airborne. With complete with ammo trailer and everything on the back, and we airborne now. We land in amongst this sort of Mapani scrub, and the driver carries on. And then we ramp up the embankment and we're airborne again, and we land on the road, and he carries on as if nothing happened. Part of the plan, Oh my word! We were fine, but I can't believe we were fine. That whole heavy vehicle was flying through the air twice, and so I developed a bit of a phobia about being a passenger on the back of an army vehicle after that. But that's all I have for us this evening, Tony.
No, that's great. Excellent. And, John, we had fantastic humor in our army, didn't we? I mean, the RLI created virtually a separate language, and foreign guys that came to fight for us as volunteers, they hadn't got a clue what the guys are talking about, and it extended beyond the RLI. I mean, we had Afrikaans humor, we had sort of indigenous African humor mixed into it. We had our own slang, and we had a bit of Brit humor. The Brits have got good humor. It was all sort of mixed into the mesh. And the guys
those coloured drivers, you know.
I was just going to say that.
Yeah, their voice procedure was, you know, hello one, this is another one. We just rolled our Land Rover. We just rolled our Land Rover over. Come fix us. We've been raised by the tourists.
Yeah, their terminology, you know, they would say, like pumping up a tire. I'll put some sky in my rounds, you know, stuff like that. Right. And I've got a couple of anecdotes to share, if you don't mind.
No, please go ahead.
Just silly little things that stick in your mind. Whenever we came across an RAR company, we would park alongside them and we'd throw stuff at them from our rat packs, and they'd throw stuff at us. We used to throw them pilchards, and they threw sudser back at us and that type of thing. So I used to love the sudser because I'd mix it in with my bully beef and that type of thing. But I remember one evening I had a few packets of sudser, and it's just in plain cellophane wrapping. It's not even labeled. And at the end of the day, I wanted to make my evening meal before we went into our sleeping posse, and it was just a little bit dark and shady under the tree. So I was making my tea, and the water was boiling, and, you know, the tea bags in there. And then I thought, right, time to add my powdered milk, which was also in an unlabeled sachet. And I ripped this thing open, and of course I put the suds in there. So I ended up eating my tea, you know, just little things. And the rat packs, do you remember the eggs that were in the rat packs?
Yes. Was it powdered eggs? Powdered eggs,
No, the actual boiled eggs in the tins. And I remember we went from Wankie up to Vic Falls once, and all of us opened up our tinned eggs. And I'd noticed that the labels on those had been relabeled 1975. But when I peeled the labels off, they'd been canned in about 1963. And these things were as hard as bullets, man. And when we got up to the signpost that said Vic Falls, we all threw our eggs at the signpost. And mine actually bounced off it. And that's how hard they were. And of course, the greys we had in our ration packs were, you know, it was quite good. Another little thing that I remember, we just finished an ambush on the river, and we'd seen this female elephant and its calf come out of the water at sunset. And then we carried on with the ambush that evening, and we'd just finished the ambush when over to my left I heard this twig snap, and I focused over to the left, got all tense. I was the guy on sort of guard duty at that point in time. The other guys were just taking it easy. And all of a sudden, this elephant came out of the bushes to the left with its baby, and the wind was blowing from beyond the elephant, so it hadn't centered us at that point. But when it did, it let out a hell of a trumpet. I mean, it was only five meters away by that point. You know, I was actually looking up at the thing. I got a hell of a fright, but this little Afrikaans guy 2 down from me called Jannie Carlos, he sat bolt upright. I'll never forget, in the moonlight, his blonde hair, the look on his face. I was turning to get away from this elephant at that point, and he stood up, but his feet was, his legs were in his sleeping bag, and so he tried running in his sleeping bag, and he fell over, and then he stood up, and he pulled the bag up to his waist, and he hopped off like he was in a beanbag race. It was just so funny watching this guy hopping away. But anyway, the other guy next to me, Alan Curry, he banged on the magazine of his FN, and the elephant got a bit of a fright and took off. Yeah, so there were incredibly funny things that happened to us. And in this sort of vein, I would like to invite guys to come forward and tell us 1 or 2 amusing incidents that happened to them in the army. And I can record it, and then we can stitch a whole collage of them together and come up with a video presentation on humor and humorous things that happen in the army. And I think that would be a welcome change to some of the other stuff we talk about.
Yeah, that's a brilliant idea, Tony. I mean, And really, when the owns get together, most of the stories that are told are not war stories.
Absolutely.
In fact, most of the stories that are told are amusing stories. So I think it would be great if we could have a couple of episodes of army humor, because we all had so many stories to tell.
Oh, the colored guys were so funny. I mean, they're just unbelievable.
Thanks so much for this time, Tony. I really appreciate you doing this interview. I wouldn't have thought of doing it if you hadn't have asked me, so I appreciate it. Thank you.
It's a pleasure, and just to remind everybody out there that Hannes depends on your support for his survival and the survival of the channel. So please do set up a Patreon account or whatever, and don't be shy. Please come forward. Contact me on Facebook by private messenger, and I'm getting some of you responding now. I've got about 11 guys that are willing to talk. So bring your humorous clips forward, even if it's 2 minutes long with me. We can stitch them together and make a really nice video out of them. So, John, thanks for letting me have the opportunity to do this. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Tony. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Bye.